Hello again, everyone. Today we're going to be going through and looking at all the Phalanx cards and probably upsetting a few people because Phalanx is going to be far and away the most controversial focus just because of what they represent. So before I get into these cards, I need to talk about Shield in general. So how useful Shield is depends on how often you're getting hit. If you're never getting hit at all, then Shield is completely worthless. If you're getting hit all the time, Shield's invaluable. So, really, it's kind of hard to frame Shield in respect to stuff from all the other focuses, because most of our stuff, we can just look at how much damage you're getting out of it, besides the healing stuff and a few other really specific things, but almost everything else is just setting you up to do damage in some way. There are, of course, some exceptions, but shield is the biggest thing where we can't really look at it on the same spectrum as most other cards in the game. So the way we're going to look at it is we're just going to look at shields up first and consider this our base. For 1 mana, you're getting 40 shield. This is the baseline. How good this is really depends on the player. If you're really good at the game and you rarely ever get hit, then you don't need shield, so this doesn't matter. Personally, I used to take shields up a lot when I was learning the game, but the more and more skilled I got at learning the patterns and avoiding shots and all that kind of stuff, the less and less impressive shields up became, until eventually I just stopped taking it entirely. So how good this is depends on the player. With that being said, all these are shield generating cards. We're going to compare them directly to shields up, because this is the simplest way to go about this. So, Blessing of Susano is our first card, and it's on the rarest spectrum for Phalanx because they have no Calamity. So, we're gaining 100 shield, we're anchoring ourselves for a second and firing 40 times 4 beams in a wide laser that covers a third of the field. So, this is a decent AoE, but the thing is, the mana cost is really, really high. So to really get the most out of this card, you need some kind of upgrades, or you need to really, you need to really care about all portions of it. If you don't care about the shield, then I wouldn't bother with this because the damage efficiency is terrible, and it just so happens that the shield efficiency is also terrible. Together, on one card stapled together, it's less inefficient, but the efficiency is still kind of bad. So for this to be justifiable, you really need to be getting some big upgrades on this, like restore half mana cost or double casting it if you can amass enough max mana. Overall, I think this card feels cool, it looks cool, it feels good to use, but when you look at the numbers, it's not as impressive as you would hope it is. Generally, this is the kind of card I like to take if it comes pre-upgraded with something that makes it a lot better, because the rates just aren't that good. Counter-Strike. This one starts in the Shopkeeper loadout. So you fire a shot for 70 damage and you gain 50 shield. You don't have to land the shot to gain the shield, you gain the shield no matter what. So for 2 mana, you're essentially stapling a shields up and then some on a 1 mana efficiency projectile. Together, I think this card's pretty decent when we compare it to Shields Up, because the projectile is worth about 1 mana. Then we're paying another 1 mana for 50 shield, so this is a better rate than Shields Up. If you're not interested in the shield, of course this isn't worthwhile, but if you are interested in shield, like you want more shield in your deck, this is definitely a great pickup because it's pretty decent efficiency. Next up we got Diamond Ring. This is in the category of rings that I really don't like because it just doesn't do enough. I don't think that having the Diamond Ring take up one of your cast slots is worth 4 shield per second. That's just not a very good rate. Yeah, it's free shield technically, but it's not really free because there's going to be a lot of situations where you're going to be forced into either casting out the ring to get out of the way or casting a spell in the air slot that you don't want to cast yet. So I don't think the rate's fast enough on this for it to really be worthwhile. However, when we compare this to Blood Shield, it suddenly starts looking really good when we make this comparison, because this is almost half as good as Blood Shield, except Blood Shield has all these extra stipulations around it. Of course, then again, I don't think Blood Shield's a very good card, and I think Diamond Ring actually serves a pretty good argument for Blood Shield being a bad card as well. However, I don't like the Diamond Ring itself because I just don't think that the rate of 4 shield per second is worth more than the potential to have other spells in that cast slot that you can use to more flexibly deal with enemies. And next up we got Entrench. So Entrench is a very bizarre card. It kind of defeats itself. Like, no matter what you're doing with this card, it doesn't make sense. Because if you gaining the 80 shield and you're not fragile, you're ruining yourself for 2 seconds. So you're probably going to take 80 damage in that time span, or even more. So you just wasted time and mana doing this, and it didn't do anything. If you do have the fragile condition, and you're running the fragile condition just for the Entrench, then it doesn't make sense either, because the Entrench is just soaking up the extra damage you would have taken from the fragile anyway, so it's still not doing anything in that case either. The only case where this makes sense is if you're running fragile on yourself for a reason besides Entrench, then this becomes okay, but you have to make sure that you can have fragile up whenever you want to cast the Entrench, because casting it without fragile is never worth it. I promise you it's terrible if you use it that way. With the fragile, it's okay, but picking up fragile just so you can use Entrench doesn't make sense, because the Entrench is just negating the damage you would have taken from the fragile anyway. So you essentially just spent 1 mana to do nothing. But if you're going to be having fragile anyway, then Entrench becomes a decent pickup because the rate's pretty good. But only if you have another good reason to run fragile. Next up we got Fate Shield. This one starts in Celes's Frost loadout, the first one, I forget what it's called, but for 1 mana we're going to shoot a 3 wide kind of line that slowly meanders across the field, and we're going to gain 200 shield. When that line hits something, we lose a 200 shield. So with dash attacks, you can try to set this up behind the enemies so that it just goes past them. Without dash attacks, you're probably looking to either try to sneak this around enemies or just use it as kind of a parry. where you're using the Fate Shield in a situation where you know you're about to get hit, and you're using it to block that. The rate of shield on this is probably the best in the game because 200 shield for 1 mana is 5 times as efficient as shields up. It's 2.5 times as efficient as Entrench. So as far as shield cards go, I think this one's pretty good, but you have to know when you want to use it. And for that, you need to have a pretty good idea of when you're going to get hit. So if there are bosses that are giving you a hard time with certain attacks, you can pick up the Fate Shield and hold on to it for when they're about to use that attack to negate the damage from it. Overall, I think this card's pretty decent if you have a good idea of what you're doing with it. Like, you need a pretty decent reason to take Fate Shield. Next up we have Forte. So, Forte is on the better side of shield producing cards in my opinion, because the rate's good, and this is just a lot of unconditional shield for 3 mana. It's a slightly better rate than Shields Up, all stapled onto one card. However, Forte consumes, unlike Shields Up, which is kind of net neutral in my opinion, because it's kind of weird because the consume doesn't actually mean much of anything. The first time through the deck you have the Forte, and past that you don't have the Forte. So how much that matters really depends on how much you value the Forte. If you're just sticking it in the deck so you can gain some shield just in case, then casting this once during a fight and having it consume is pretty great. But if you're getting hit all the time and you're trying to take all these shield cards to mitigate the damage you're taking for the full duration of the fight, then the consume suddenly becomes undesirable, but you're going to take Forte anyway because it's just so much shield for 3 mana. Overall, I think this is a bit better than Shields Up, probably a little bit better than Counter-Strike as well, because if you're taking these kind of cards, you're probably here just for the shields. So it's another one where if you want shield, take it. If you have enough shield or you don't care about shields, don't worry about it. Next up we got Ice Shield. This one is kind of a questionable card. So the thing with Ice Shield is if you cast this more than twice during a fight, it's not worth it because the frost damage just goes straight through shield and it's going to deal 150 damage directly to your HP. The fragile also makes this a bit iffy, but the shield you're gaining from this is not as bad as the fragile damage you're probably taking. I'd say that all in all this probably amounts to gaining about 100 shield for 2 mana, but you can only cast it twice before it becomes not worth it anymore. So it's the same rate as Shields Up. Well, it's the same rate as Forte. It's slightly better rate than Shields Up. But with this one, I think you really want to look for a consumption upgrade on it, because you don't want to be casting this more than once, maybe twice over the course of the fight, because then it just suddenly becomes really detrimental. So I would pick this up if it comes pre-loaded with a consumption upgrade, or if your deck is just really huge and you're rarely getting to the point where you would cast a single card more than once, maybe twice anyway. In those cases, this is probably worthwhile. Otherwise, I would stay away from it, because if the frost damage procs, this card is just terrible. Next up we got Iron Will. This one starts in Violet's double time loadout. So for 0 mana, we're dealing 200 damage with the projectile and then giving the target 180 shield. The idea here is that we're using this to finish targets off. It's very strong in the early game room fights because you're just going to be able to use it to nuke enemies very quickly, and the 100 A shield won't matter when they're dead. If you're not using it to execute, then baseline this is 20 damage, which is You could, in theory, combo this with some stuff that pierces or removes shield, but that's just way too much work to make Iron Will better. The real upside you want on this card is finding 2 times damage and consume on it. That one's really great because then this is 220 damage for 0 mana, which is a just unbelievably powerful rate. So definitely look for 2 times damage and consume on this one. If you can find that, this is a really spectacular card. Next we got Miss Me Shield. I don't care much for this card. I think it's probably worse than Shields Up. The rate's better, but the risk of it doing nothing is... it kind of kills the card. Because generally, I think if you want shields, you want your shields to be reliable. Miss Me Shield just kind of doesn't work sometimes, and when that happens, you just spent 1 mana to do nothing. So that really kind of kills the card for me. For shields in particular, I want them to be reliable. I don't want this weird stipulation where sometimes my shield just won't work. So I would say this is a bit worse than Shields Up. Next up we got Reflector. I don't really know what 5 Reflect means. I guess it means that it can only reflect a max of 5 attacks, but there are very few circumstances where you're going to be getting hit more than 5 times in a span of 0.6 seconds, so that doesn't really matter. So for 0.6 seconds we're invincible and we reflect shots back at the enemy. This, in my opinion, is a bit comparable to Fate Shield, but much trickier to use. Overall, I think that you're interested in this kind of effect mostly just for blocking the incoming damage. Trying to use this to do damage yourself is kind of finicky and hard to pull off, and ultimately probably not worth it. So really, I don't think this card's that great. I would take Fate Shield over it in pretty much every circumstance if I'm looking for this kind of effect. It kind of suffers from the problem of we gotta hold on to this until the boss or the enemy does this specific attack that we're trying to block, and then and only then is this card useful. At all other times it's just kind of dead. So it kind of has a problem of clogging up your spellcast slots. Whereas Fate Shield, you can just throw it out whenever and you'll have the shield for a pretty long while most of the time before it hits anything, if it hits anything. So Reflector is just too clunky to make good use out of, in my opinion. Next up we got Shield Beam. Riva starts with this one in her base loadout. When the shield beam hits, you gain 20 shield and it anchors you. So the rate on this compared to Counter-Strike is obviously atrocious. The only reason you would want this over Counter-Strike is if you're trying to use it to hit multiple enemies in a row to gain shield off all of them, then it's pretty decent, but that doesn't really work on most bosses. So really what you're looking for is plus shot number upgrades on this. Then it becomes okay, but it's kind of like Counter-Strike, but there's more hoops to jump through, but it has a higher ceiling. So I'd say it's pretty comparable to Counter-Strike, but you just need to put more work into the shield beam to make it worthwhile. If you just want shield and you don't want to have to worry about the shield and all the stuff you need to do to get it, Counter-Strike is just better. But if you want to really try to milk out how much shield you can get out of your cards, you can do some pretty good work with shield beam. So I'd say they're about on par. When you would take one or the other, it just depends on how much work you're willing to put into a card. Next up we got shield catch. So this one is kind of a weird one to talk about because, well, first off, it starts in Reva's base loadout. If you catch, the only time this card's good is if you catch the potion, but you don't get hit trying to catch the potion, and then the shield's still useful. So you need to throw the potion, then catch the potion without getting hit while catching the potion, and then get hit later. If you're looking for shield, I think Shields Up is a bit better in general than this because, again, it's more reliable. This has kind of the same problem as Miss Me Shield, where sometimes it just won't work. And then you spent 1 mana to do nothing, and now you have no shields. So your next hit you're taking is going straight to your HP. And that's generally not what I'm looking for in shield cards. In shield cards, I really value consistency. I want to know exactly what I'm getting from the shield card before I cast it, and then surprise, surprise, the shield catch, we botched the shield catch and now it didn't do anything. And if you're using shield catch, that probably means you're using shields because you still get hit pretty frequently, which in turn means you're probably more likely to botch the shield catch in the first place. So not a big fan. I can see why you would take it, but I think if you're looking for shields in the first place, Shields Up is just way more reliable. And that's kind of the strength Forte has as well. It's very reliable, you know exactly what you're getting. Next up we got Shield Throw, which is probably the card here that has the most to talk about. So, you fire a shot that deals damage equal to your shield, you lose all shield, and you can catch it to regain the shield for 1 mana. Reva's base loadout starts with this. And as a dedicated strategy, I don't think you can really use this as your core DPS strategy. I think this can supplement it alright, but you need something else. You can't get all your damage from shield catch or shield throw and expect it to work out for you in the long run. So, how good is this card? It depends how much shield you have in your deck, obviously. And it's really hard to evaluate for that reason, because this is kind of like a shield payoff that's turning your shields into damage, but if you miss with it, it's really bad, because then you lose all your shield. So the more powerful this is, the more risky it is. Overall, I think this is a card I don't think I've actually ever taken on a run. I've only used it in Reva's base loadout, and it's alright there. But there are some interesting things you can do with Shield Throw. For example, normally you lose 40% of your shield when you shuffle, or more on higher hell modes. With Shield Throw, if you have a way to shuffle instantly, because the shield is lost when your shuffle finishes. So let's say you have a dual disc, right? Or a gambit, or any way to make your shuffle instant or near instant. What you can do is you can shield throw and then shuffle while the shield throw is out there, it'll bounce back, you can catch it, and the shield won't be reduced. You'll still have the same amount of shield you started with before you threw out the shield throw. So that's something neat you can do with it, but I don't know how practical that is. So really this is just a good starting damage source in Reva's base loadout. I don't think I've ever taken this outside of that context, and I don't think I ever plan on taking it because I just don't think the card offers enough compared to other more consistent damage strategies that don't require you to jump through hoops to get them to, well, not as many hoops to get them to work. We talked about shields up already. Spell shield. This is another weird one. It's, besides Fling, it's the only card that has backfire. So 120 shield for 2 mana is a very good rate. I think that for permanent shields with no super weird stipulations, this is the best rate. It's a much better rate than shields up. It's a much better rate than Forte. It's a bit better than Counter-Strike. So this backfires, and that's supposedly the downside to Spell Shield. So if we're taking Spell Shield, we gotta take the backfire into account. What exactly does backfire do for us? Unlike Fling, this one's backfiring without casting the spell, so it's just consuming the card. I think the best use of Spell Shield is to run this in a jam deck, where you can get the jams in the deck, and then Spell Shield while you have a jam in the other slot, and you essentially just gained 120 shield for free, as the jam will cost you 2 mana to cast anyway. This way, you're getting the same effect as casting the jam, where you just consume it, and you get 120 shield. Of course, if you have some strong jam synergies going on, you won't get those to go off when you cast the jam. However, I think usually 120 shield is going to be more valuable than whatever synergies you have going on with one jam. So I would use it there. You could also do the same kind of thing with kunais, except that makes a bit less sense because the kunais are something you're actively wanting to cast. The other case is you put this in a deck that doesn't have these kind of fleeting consume cards that get added to your deck, and you're trying to use Spell Shield to cut stuff out of deck and refine it for late game. Kind of the same way you would use a card like True Grit in Slay the Spire. That's a bit harder to pull off, because the idea is you would use the Spell Shield on boss fights to remove the cards that you're normally using to room clear from the deck, so that you just have the cards you want for boss fights left in the deck. However, I think this is a very convoluted way of scaling in boss fights, and it's kind of slow for that purpose as well, so I don't think I really care to use it in that context. However, you could take the Spell Shield just by itself and not worry about the backfire, and if your deck's big enough, it won't matter. So this is another one I think people kind of underrate because they worry too much about the backfire. Think about it. If you have a 25 card deck and most fights end in one cycle, you're consuming one random card from the deck to gain 120 shield for 2 mana. That's pretty good. It's pretty good. Odds are that one card you consumed wouldn't have made a huge difference compared to whatever other spell you could cast with the same mana you would have spent casting that spell, and if it is a really important spell, you can just cast it and wait for something that's a bit less important to show up and then backfire that. Overall, I think this is one of the better shield cards just because the rate's so good and the supposed downside doesn't really matter most of the time, I feel. The only time where this would be really bad is if you're running a really thin deck strategy, but then of course you just wouldn't take the spell shield because of course you know it's going to be terrible there. So I would pick this card more often than I see most people taking it, because I think it's a lot better than people give it credit for. They worry too much about the backfire. So yeah, definitely take this card more. Stasis. This is another one that's kind of in the same vein as Fate Shield and Reflector, except I think this one's a bit more questionable than those. We're freezing for 2 seconds to gain a arbitrarily large amount of shield, and then we unfreeze. So the idea here is that we're essentially using this to parry an attack like we do with Reflector. Compared to Reflector, this lasts significantly longer, however, we're not reflecting the attack back, and we can't do anything during these 2 seconds. I think this card is significantly worse than Fate Shield because it's locking you in place. You can't act while you're doing this. And in a 2 second period, it's not very often that the difference between 200 and 999 shield will be very meaningful. Over the course of just 2 seconds, usually 200 shield is going to be plenty. You don't need this 999 shield. Just take Fate Shield instead. It's much better than this, because the arbitrarily large amount of shield here is kind of just overkill. Next up, we got Steel Skin, which is giving you 40 defense for 3 seconds. This is another one of these cards that's in the same vein as Stasis and Fate Shield. This one, however, has a bit more of a clear use case compared to Fate Shield, and there are cases where it's better than Fate Shield, and those are when you're getting hit a lot over the course of 3 seconds. Of course, then you could again make the argument that how often are you taking more than 200 damage over the course of 3 seconds? More than you are over the course of 2 seconds, but I think this one's pretty comparable to Fate Shield. And if you're really looking for this kind of effect, I would just take whichever one of these two cards shows up first, Fate Shield or Steel Skin. It really just depends on what you're looking for personally. Like, if you need this kind of effect, and you know you need it, then you're gonna take whichever one of these shows up first. So, all these Phalanx cards, most of them are quite subjective because it depends on how highly you value these defensive effects, which depends largely on your experience with the game. Unfortunately, these cards are overall pretty boring in my opinion. There's not a whole lot of exciting stuff going on here. Everything here, except for Iron Will and Shield Throw, really just Iron Will. Like, everything here is just a defensive thing. Like, everything here just exists to reduce the amount of damage you're taking to your HP over the course of a fight. So, I don't care much for Phalanx as a concept. I just don't think it's very exciting. They're more on the boring end of the spectrum. But they definitely serve their purpose. So, next time we are going to be looking at the last focus, which is slash fic, which is kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum from Phalanx. That they have a lot of really crazy, flashy stuff going on, but a lot of it just doesn't make sense together, and I have no idea what they're really trying to do as a whole. So we'll look at them next time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys then.